Let's get right into it. Number 10. Operation Paul Bunyan. It's 1976, and the US and North Korea almost start a war over a tree. There's this poplar tree in the DMZ between North and South Korea that's blocking the view between two guard posts. The Americans decide they need to trim this tree. They send 2 officers with some Korean workers to cut some branches. But then North Korean soldiers show up and they're not happy about this unauthorized landscaping project. They tell the Americans to stop. The Americans say no. The North Korean soldiers pull out axes and murder the 2 American officers over a tree. America launched Operation Paul Bunyan, possibly the most over-the-top tree trimming operation in human history. The mission involved 813 troops, 27 helicopters, B-52 bombers with nuclear weapons on standby, F-4 and F-111 fighter jets, an aircraft carrier task force just offshore, and some chainsaws. All this firepower just to cut down one tree. The operation starts at 7 a.m. sharp. The North Koreans wake up to the sound of chainsaws and look out to see an army ready for World War III. Meanwhile, South Korean special forces were in the area with claymore mines, ready to rain death on anyone who interfered with this landscaping project. The tree is cut down in 42 minutes. After all this drama, after nearly starting a nuclear war over a tree, the North Koreans sent a letter from Kim Il-sung expressing regret over the initial axe murder incident. Number 9. The Lead Mask Mystery. Imagine going for a hike in Brazil and stumbling across 2 dead bodies wearing homemade lead masks that look like something out of a budget sci-fi movie. That's what happened in 1966, when a young boy found 2 electronics technicians dead on a hilltop near Rio de Janeiro. The 2 men, Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, were dressed in their best suits, wearing waterproof coats, and had weird lead masks covering their faces. These weren't Halloween costume masks. They were carefully crafted pieces that looked like crude radiation protection gear. Next to the bodies, investigators found a notebook with a cryptic message. 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. The police found an empty water bottle and a packet that might have contained these mysterious capsules, but they never found out what was in them. The coroner went on vacation right after the bodies were found. By the time he got back from his totally not suspicious vacation, the bodies were too decomposed to test for toxins. These guys were respected electronics technicians who told their families they needed to buy supplies for work. Instead, they took a large sum of money, bought the same raincoats, and ended up dead on a hill wearing DIY lead masks. Some people think they were trying to contact aliens. Others say they were part of some weird spiritualist or UFO cult. The case remains unsolved to this day. Number 8. The Tarim Mummies. In the middle of China's Taklamakan Desert, archaeologists found mummies that look European. These mummies are tall, have red and blonde hair, long noses, and they're wearing plaid wool clothing. It's like finding a Starbucks in ancient Rome. The weirdest part is these mummies are up to 4,000 years old. These weren't just a few lost tourists. We're talking about entire communities of European-looking people living in the heart of ancient China. They even found a baby mummy wearing a little wool beanie with pom-poms. It's like finding a hipster's wardrobe in King Tut's tomb. The preservation is incredible. The dry desert conditions kept everything so well preserved that you can still see their facial features and even tattoos. One female mummy, known as the Beauty of Lulan, has perfectly preserved eyelashes. Scientists are completely stumped. These clearly Caucasian people ended up in Western China thousands of years before Marco Polo was even born. DNA tests show these people were a mix of Western Eurasian and Eastern Eurasian ancestry, but nobody can explain how their civilization got there, or why they settled in one of the most inhospitable deserts on Earth. The Chinese government has been sensitive about these mummies, as their existence complicates the traditional narrative of a singular origin for Chinese civilization. To this day, they represent a lost branch of the human story, a mysterious culture that thrived and then vanished in the sands of time. Number 7. The Battle of Karansebes. It's 1788, and the Austrian army is marching through modern-day Romania to fight the Ottoman Empire. The army is about 100,000 men from all over the empire. Austrians, Hungarians, Italians, Czechs, and a bunch of other groups who can barely understand each other. One night, some cavalry scouts cross a river to look for Turks. They don't find any. Instead, they find local merchants selling schnapps and start drinking. Then, some infantry shows up and wants in on the fun, but the cavalry guys aren't sharing. A heated argument breaks out. During the argument, a shot is fired. The infantry, feeling left out, starts yelling, "Turkey, Turkey," meaning Turks, Turks, probably just to scare the cavalry into fleeing so they could get the booze. But because nobody speaks the same language, some troops actually think the Turks are attacking. The cavalry, who are pretty drunk at this point, start scattering. The infantry, who can't see what's happening in the dark, think the cavalry retreat is proof the Turks are here, and they start shooting back. Then a German-speaking officer shouts "Halt, halt" to stop the chaos. But to non-German speakers in the army, this sounds like Allah, Allah. Now everyone's convinced the Turks are in the camp. The whole army descends into chaos. Officers try to restore order, but their shouted commands just convince more troops that the Turks are attacking. Soldiers start firing at anything that moves. Others flee, trampling their own comrades. The Holy Roman Emperor himself, Joseph II, falls off his horse into a creek. By morning, the Austrian army had inflicted hundreds, possibly over 1,000, casualties on itself. The actual Turkish army shows up 2 days later to find the Austrians have already defeated themselves. They just walk in and take the city of Karansebes without a fight. Number 6. The War of Jenkins Ear. Imagine getting into a fistfight, keeping the scab from your bruised knuckle for 7 years, then showing it to the principal to start a whole school riot. That's basically what happened here, but with ships and cannons. In 1731, a British merchant captain named Robert Jenkins is sailing in the Caribbean. Along comes a Spanish patrol ship. The Spanish officer boards Jenkins' ship, accuses him of smuggling, which, let's be honest, he probably was, and decides to make an example of him. Instead of just fining him, this Spanish officer, Juan de Leon Fandino, cuts off Jenkins's ear. He supposedly tells him, "Go and tell your king that I will do the same if he dares to do the same." Fast forward 7 years. 7 years of Jenkins keeping his own severed, pickled ear in a jar. In 1738, Jenkins is called to testify before the British Parliament. He dramatically presents his shriveled ear as evidence of Spanish brutality. The members of Parliament, who were already looking for an excuse to go to war with Spain over trade disputes, see this ear and collectively lose their minds. It's like when you're already mad at someone and they do one tiny thing, and that's it. You're ready to throw down. Britain declares war on Spain. A whole war. Over an ear. That had been sitting in a jar for 7 years. The crazy part is the war lasted for 9 years and eventually merged into the larger War of the Austrian Succession, causing hundreds of thousands of casualties. Some historians think Jenkins might have lost his ear in a different fight and just blamed the Spanish, but it doesn't matter. The story was good enough to start a war. Number 5. The New England Vampire Panic. It's the 1800s in New England, and a family member just died from tuberculosis. Instead of just being sad, you decide the next logical step is to dig up your other dead relatives to check if they're vampires. This wasn't just one crazy family. Entire communities in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Vermont were doing this. They called it therapeutic exhumation, which is a fancy way of saying, let's dig up corpses to see if they're supernaturally eating our living relatives. If someone in your family died from what they called consumption, and then another family member got sick, the folklore explanation was that the first person to die was a vampire, rising from the grave to drain the life from the rest of the family. The solution was to dig up the suspected vampire's corpse and check for signs. If the body was not well decomposed, or if there was liquid blood in the heart, that was proof. The most famous case was Mercy Brown in 1892. Her family had been devastated by tuberculosis. Her mother and sister had already died. When her brother Edwin got sick, the townspeople convinced her father to exhume the bodies. When they got to Mercy's body, which had been buried for 2 months in an above-ground vault during winter, they found it surprisingly well preserved. The cold had basically refrigerated her. But try telling that to a bunch of scared New Englanders with shovels. They decided Mercy was the vampire, cut out her heart and liver, burned them on a rock, and mixed the ashes with water. Then they made her sick brother Edwin drink the ashes as a cure. He died 2 months later because he had terminal tuberculosis, not because his sister's ghost was snacking on him. This was happening in one of the most educated parts of America, during a time when we had trains and telegraphs. The panic only stopped when medical science proved tuberculosis was caused by bacteria, not undead relatives with the munchies. Number 4. The Dancing Plague of 1518. Imagine looking out your window and seeing your neighbor dancing in the street, not like a fun little dance. They're dancing like their life depends on it, and they don't stop, for days. This actually happened in Strasbourg, France, in July 1518. It all started with one woman, Frau Trophea, who just started dancing fervently in the middle of the street. She kept dancing for nearly a week straight. Within that week, 34 other people joined her. By the end of the month, about 400 people were caught in the grip of this unstoppable dancing mania. People danced day and night, their feet becoming bloody and raw. Many danced until they collapsed from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion. Some reports claim as many as 15 people a day were dying from it. The local government was baffled. Their solution? More dancing. They believed the dancers would only be cured if they danced the fever out of their systems. They cleared out guild halls, built a wooden stage, and even hired musicians to provide a soundtrack to the deadly dance party. This just made things worse. Doctors of the era ruled out supernatural causes and blamed it on hot blood, basically medieval speak for "we have no clue." Modern historians think it was a case of mass psychogenic illness or mass hysteria, likely triggered by the extreme stress of famine and disease that plagued the region. After about a month, it just stopped. As mysteriously as it began, the dancers ceased their frenzied movements, and the plague was over. Number 3. The Kentucky Meat Shower. Imagine you're chilling in your backyard in Kentucky, 1876. It's a nice clear day, not a cloud in sight. Then suddenly, it starts raining meat. On March 3rd, 1876, in Bath County, Kentucky, flakes of fresh red meat started falling from the sky. The meat shower lasted for several minutes, covering an area about 100 yards long and 50 yards wide. A woman named Mrs. Mary Crouch was out in her yard making soap when the meaty weather hit. She said the chunks felt greasy and looked like fresh beef. 2 men who tasted it said it tasted like mutton or venison. Scientists actually showed up to investigate. They found pieces ranging from small flakes to chunks as big as your hand. A man named Leopold Brandeis presented a sample to the Newark Scientific Association, concluding it was nostoc, a type of cyanobacteria that swells into a jelly-like mass when it rains. Others who examined the meat under microscopes concluded it was lung tissue from either a horse or, grotesquely, a human infant. Another scientist declared it was cartilage. The most accepted theory today is that it was vulture vomit. Vultures are known to projectile vomit when startled mid-flight. This helps them lighten their load so they can escape faster. A whole flock of vultures, having just eaten a dead horse or cow, could have been startled and vomited in unison, causing the shower. But there were no vultures spotted in the area that day, and some witnesses described the meat chunks as looking fresh and cleanly cut. The Kentucky Meat Shower remains one of those bizarre historical events where even the most likely explanation is still incredibly weird. Number 2. The Green Children of Woolpit. Sometime in the 12th century, in the village of Woolpit, England, something straight out of a fairy tale happened. Villagers were harvesting their fields when they discovered 2 children hiding near one of the wolf-trapping pits that gave the village its name. The children, a boy and a girl, were normal in every way, except for one thing. Their skin was bright green. They were wearing strange clothes made of a material no one recognized, and they spoke a language nobody understood. When brought to the village, they refused all food. They were starving, but they wouldn't eat anything offered to them until someone brought in some raw broad beans, which they ate immediately. The boy, who seemed younger, became sick and died shortly after being baptized. The girl, however, survived. She gradually learned to eat other foods, and over time, her green skin faded to a normal color. She learned to speak English and was eventually able to tell her story. According to her, she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land. It was a subterranean world where the sun never rose, and everything was in a perpetual state of twilight. All the inhabitants of this land were green. One day, while herding their father's flock, they heard a loud sound like bells and followed it into a cave. They wandered in the darkness for a long time before emerging into the bright sunlight of Woolpit, which stunned them. Historians have tried to rationalize the story. Some say the children were Flemish immigrants, lost and malnourished. Their green color could have been caused by hypochromic anemia, a condition resulting from a very poor diet. St. Martin's Land could have been a nearby village, and the story of a subterranean world, a child's confused memory. But none of these explanations cover all the details. We're left with a medieval story recorded by 2 separate chroniclers that makes absolutely zero sense. Number 1. The Tunguska Event. Imagine waking up one morning and the sky explodes with the force of 15 million tons of TNT. That's exactly what happened in a remote part of Siberia on June 30th, 1908. At around 7:17 a.m. local time, a massive explosion occurred in the atmosphere. The blast was so powerful, it flattened 80 million trees over an area of 830 square miles. That's like wiping out all of New York City. The shockwave was powerful enough to knock people off their feet 40 miles away. It registered on seismic stations across Europe and was detected by barographs in England. For several nights afterward, the sky over Europe and Asia was so bright from atmospheric dust that people could read newspapers outside at midnight. But here's where it gets weird. When a scientific expedition led by Leonid Kulik finally reached the remote site in 1927, they found no impact crater. There was not a single fragment of a meteorite, just millions of trees lying flat in a giant, radial, butterfly-shaped pattern, all pointing away from the center of the blast. Eerily, some of the trees right at ground zero were still standing, but they were completely stripped of all their branches, like a forest of telephone poles. For over a century, scientists have debated what happened. The leading theory is that a small asteroid or a piece of a comet, perhaps 100 to 200 feet in diameter, entered the atmosphere and exploded in the air before it could hit the ground. Other, more fringe theories have proposed everything from a tiny black hole passing through the Earth to an accident involving an alien spacecraft. The most chilling part is the timing. If the object had entered the atmosphere just 4 hours and 47 minutes later, it would have exploded directly over St. Petersburg, the capital of Russia at the time, changing the course of human history forever. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.